path to mountaintop as vector to top. So goals are often already, or the frame of goals is often already using the analogy of a mountaintop. Now, of course, the goal of the mountaintop, or the mountaintop itself, is kind of a problematic goal because it's an absolute goal. The mountain has an absolute height, and so once you reach it, you are there. But in practice, I think that, first of all, the psychology seems to be adapted in a certain way, such that it moves always the goal, which is also maybe something else I wanted to talk about in another video, where I also had some thoughts about this. But once let's just assume, okay, we have this one absolute mountain, and you can go on to the top of this mountain. Then there are now multiple ways in which this involves the classical metaphor of going up a mountain and also facing challenges in life, problems in life one needs to overcome. But there also might be some additional things which I at least have thought about. Maybe somebody else already came up with them already. Now, the top of the mountain is the goal. And so in order to reach the goal, you have now this option to go towards the mountain. There might be multiple pathways towards this, but there might also be already some pathways which people already have taken. So in theory now the mountain itself does not have any pathways on it, but because people already have gone to the same goal again and again and again, such as maybe creating a family, for example, there are multiple pathways you can potentially follow. And what is a pathway? It is basically just where people already walked. And the more statistically, the more people walked on a certain path or at a certain point on the three-dimensional plane outside of the mountain, then we would have a path. Of course, now these different points are also connected. So it is unlikely they are connected by steps. It is unlikely that you have a step here and then the next step would be 30 meters somewhere else. And also, every step has to occur on this basically infinitely small layer, which is basically the top of the mountain. Inside the mountain, rarely one ever finds oneself going up, at least if there are no tunnels or something like this, or an elevator inside the mountain. And then also, because people cannot fly, there is no really... And of course you could climb onto a mountain, not onto a mountain, but onto a tree, but then eventually you would have to go down again, because, well, it doesn't lead to the mountaintop. So, to a certain extent, one has to move on the surface of the mountain, which one could see as an infinitely small, basically, plane outside of the mountain. Then there are also these paths, which people might already have taken towards the same goal. Now, often, one might find oneself trying to reach a goal where people haven't gone before, and so there also might be no paths, which might make the whole thing more difficult. But also this then, in actuality, is probably a lot more difficult, because trying to get to a goal for which there are no established pathways for, it might also seem more difficult, because, well, there are no established pathways for it, because people haven't gone there before, and therefore there is less guidance onto the top of this mountain. But then there is also this thing where the top of the mountain, it is kind of existing. You never actually really see it. You only have a vague feeling often that it is going up. Sometimes it might even be going down. You might be going down. So now you have this vector, and this vector is basically where you go. So this vector could be basically in front of you, and because the vector always kind of has the same point, it's pointing towards a certain direction. Now, if you would go straight up the mountain, then you would have the mountaintop, and then if you would be here, then the vector would point upwards toward the mountaintop. But that's rarely ever the case, because, well, it's quite hard to go up the mountain like this. So then what this introduces is the optionality, or rather the necessity in this case, for moving not up this vector, because this vector would be quite hard, and also there might be trees in the middle of it, or there is a big rock which you cannot overcome. So you have to go around this, and what this around this introduces is that you have to change the vector. So if we assume now the vector is actually what you are trying to do, so the current method of optimization towards meeting this goal, which is the mountaintop, then the vector is always changing. And this is unless the path is kind of into the same direction, but also then it would again be changing. You also cannot go to the right, you also cannot go to the left. So if there is now one path, now there might be also multiple paths, so therefore we have kind of two different vectors, which then would represent a joint junction in three-dimensional space. But then if we go back to maybe one path up the mountain, then we have one vector that is pointing forward. And now it is quite useful in terms of the analogy, I think, that if we have this now, then there is no, so if there is in the middle path, and to the right it goes down, and to the left it goes actually up. So you cannot really, you could climb potentially, but there is higher risk involved in climbing compared to just hiking forward. So you have to follow this vector. And now this vector might actually point also into the opposite direction. And this might also represent to a certain extent what one sometimes needs to do in life, or when trying to overcome a certain problem or get towards a certain goal or optimize for a certain goal. You have to basically change the direction all the time. So the directional changes are required because the path to the mountain actually requires you to constantly change the vector that leads to the mountaintop instead of trying to follow it linearly. And so it also seems to represent the complexity of real life actually, and also maybe having a problem for which there have not been solutions for. And if there have not been solutions for, you actually don't have a path in front of you at all. So the frequency of the joint junctions where there are multiple paths you possibly could take, or there might also be paths which you tried to go up, but then eventually you realized, okay, it was worth a try, it was worth a certain, so there was a certain risk associated with it. Your expected value, in this case, or expected value calculation was higher for this path compared to this path, but then you eventually realized that you couldn't go up this path. And the same might be true for also life to a certain extent, or problems to a certain extent, where you take a risk on going forward like this because you think it might get you to the mountaintop, but actually the vector points completely into the opposite direction. But you, in the big picture, in the mid and long-term thinking compared to the short-term thinking of just the vector, you think that this allows you to reach the mountaintop compared to a competitor, or compared to the version of you that took the other path in less time. So I think the mountaintop analogy, and also going upward, allows for a couple of more, or a few more observations and similarities between facing a problem and overcoming a problem in life, but then also it has the downside of having this absolute goal, which I might discuss in a different video.